Well, funding for Ukraine and placing more pressure on Russia. They're among key considerations of finance chiefs of the world's biggest economies gathering in India. On the eve of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen called for action against companies and governments that are dodging Western sanctions to do business with Moscow.
We have ongoing work on sanctions, working with our partners. We are seeking to strengthen sanctions and to make sure that we address violations of sanctions. And clearly the Russians are looking for routes to backfill.
The Treasury Secretary also singled out China with this warning about evading sanctions.
We have made clear that providing material support to Russia or assistance with any type of systemic sanctions evasion would be a very serious concern to us.
She's in India and set to join other finance ministers from the Group of 7 and wider Group of 20 nations for talks. It will be the first major meeting of India's year-long presidency of the bloc. Media report G7 finance ministers could discuss possible fresh sanctions against Moscow and more support for Ukraine. But Indian government officials have said the country, which has kept a neutral stance on the war, does not want additional sanctions against Russia to be discussed at G20 meetings. And for more on this, let's speak with Rebecca Bundan in Mumbai. Rebecca, Ukraine front and center on the agenda of meetings between G20 and G7 leaders, as well as ministers for some countries, and that includes host India, hoping to keep a neutral stance on the war. So what can we realistically expect to come out of these meetings?
Yes, that's right. This is the first major event under India's G20 presidency. And it does come as India has maintained that neutral stance on Russia's war in Ukraine as we approach the eve of its invasion. And that's largely because India has long been dependent upon Moscow for a lot of its defense equipment. And also increasingly over the past year, India has been importing more crude oil from Russia. So it's been sitting on the fence a bit, and it's been cautious about statements that it's made on Moscow. And we've heard these reports coming through from Reuters, which says that government sources here have been saying that they don't want to see these discussions of potential further economic sanctions on Russia. And that also, in terms of the communique that comes out, apparently, there are these reports are also saying that India doesn't want to see the word war used to describe the conflict. However, we do know that the G7 countries, aside from the broader G20, they are meeting ahead of the broader G20 meeting of finance chiefs and central bank governors, which starts on Friday. And we do know that those G7 countries are really quite focused. Many of them are focused on pushing for further measures to try to put more pressure on Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. In particular, we have heard from U.S. Treasury Secretary already, Janet Yellen, who has been talking about a need for a strong condemnation of Russia's war.
Rebecca, what else can we expect G7 and G20 leaders and ministers to discuss?
There are quite a few items that are on the agenda, and those do include global inflation. And although inflation has been easing a bit for some countries, that's still a matter of concern. It's going to be a topic that does come up for discussion. There's also a major issue that's really going to be a topic of focus is debt restructuring. Now, there are several countries, particularly in South Asia, if we look at somewhere like Sri Lanka, for example, that are struggling with debts. Last year, Sri Lanka defaulted. And this means that at the G20 meeting, there is going to be this focus on putting pressure on countries, in particular China, to actually help with these debt restructuring efforts to try to get some of these countries out of those problems. There was also that warning as well from Janet Yellen about China, if it were to lend any material support to Russia's war, that would be a matter of very serious concern. And we do also know that this is a venue, the G20 is a potential venue as well, to discuss potential reforms that could help boost World Bank lending for issues including climate change financing, potential pandemics, and general global economic issues. So these are all likely to be topics that will come up and that will be in focus over the next couple of days.
Oh, thanks for that look ahead. Rebecca Bundan reporting live to us there from Mumbai.